Alliance's signing of Reckless was understandably a very high-profile move, not just because it had always been the rumour that everyone had heard about for months and months, just after Worlds essentially, because Alliance were the best European team. They'd convincingly won the summer split. They'd gone to Worlds. They'd been able to take a game off Cloud9, a game off Najim Whiteshield. Clearly a team with strengths, with potential. Not only that, Reckless, obviously his time in Fnatic was successful. He proved himself to be a top player, and he showed that he had some potential still left in his game, and as much as his skill set was very high level, but he had some things to develop, and if he was able to get some of those in position, he not only would be one of the best Western players, which he already is, but then he'd be in position to legitimately be competing with like elite level players at his position in the other regions, and potentially getting the better of it, not just having good games or the occasional competitive performance but losing. So when this team came together, a lot of people who were fans thought like, okay, this is going to be what Alliance needs. Like, this will take them to the next level. Whereas this is what worried me, is that I actually thought Tabs was quite underrated. I went into it into my video about Tabs and the criticism of him. I didn't think it would change that much, actually. The key problem is it would change in as much as Reckless and Alliance are different players. So that would have an effect on how the AD carry position works within Alliance, as I'll address in this video. But the key problem is a lot of the flaws. I mean, I put it in the other video that Alliance had 99 problems, but Tabs wasn't the biggest one, or wasn't the main one. That's the problem. The 99 problems still exist to a degree. So let's think of some of the problems that used to exist in Alliance. You start immediately with sort of the shot calling. Like, they were way too passive, always playing for that late game style, and they didn't want to create certain types of action early on where they felt like there was risk involved, or they wouldn't pull the trigger when they might have actually had a favourable outcome, but they thought we could hold back and just posture a bit and then just go back to laning. And obviously the team's based around one of Froggen's strengths is if you just let him lane and get the farm, and he's going to win his lane in terms of farm, then he's going to get strong in the late game. So they've always still sort of tended towards the old CLG EU mentality. Then we can go player by player by player. So what we'll do is let's go player by player and address some of the old flaws and the new, and maybe new things that they've got as flaws, or how they fit into the old flaws. But first of all, let's put the result that just happened in the context of the actual tournament. So Alliance finished 3rd to 4th at IEM San Jose, and they'd already gotten advanced to the semi-finals anyway. So essentially they just went there, lost one best of 3 series, and they were out. Not impressive, but we have to be reasonable here. When you consider how bad TSM were and their loss against Unicorns of Love, and then Unicorns of Love going to the final and getting fairly easily trashed, actually, I think you have to look at the tournament and the performances and say, actually, Alliance was the second best team in the tournament. First of all, they actually gave Cloud9 a run for their money. Here's a key point to make. Yes, Cloud9 were impressive, and Cloud9 not only won the tournament, but in the series against Alliance, which was 2-1, Cloud9 was actually the better team, in my opinion, in every single of the games, in all 3, even the one they lost. Now, here's the key thing though. Even though Cloud9 was better in all 3 games, and they were a bit ahead, and they had an edge on them all the time, Alliance had chances to win that series. They were actually close to winning that series. In the 3rd game, there was a period where, sort of a 5 to 10 minute stretch, where you actually thought, oh, actually Alliance is going to win this game. They're in the driving seat, they're ahead, they've got opportunities here. But it's Cloud9. They created opportunities, they turned fights, they got little edges and caught someone here and spun that into this. Like, Cloud9 did what Cloud9 does, and it was overall an impressive performance and worthy winners. But when you look at the context of all the games in the tournament, you have to say Alliance was the second best team there. And I think if Alliance had gone to the final, I think they would have handedly taken care of Unicorns of Love as well. Maybe Unicorns of Love could have took a game because Alliance has these flaws, but I think it would have been a 3-1 or a 3-0. I think Alliance would have won the tournament. So with that said, that's the point here. It's not that Alliance have gotten worse. It's not they're going to be bad. So I think they're going to be sort of similar in terms of they'll have some aspects of dominance due to the strengths they have, but the weaknesses are still glaring and are still there. So let's talk about some of the players in the team. Let's start with the best player, Froggen. Now, you know that if you've watched many of my videos or my series like Summoning Insight, you know I think he's the best Western player. I think it's quite convincing that he's the best Western player. He's the most complete player in the West. He's the only player in the West that competes on multiple levels with his Korean counterparts. Like, yeah, like all the players in League of Legends, he's not the best at his whole position because no one is who's a Westerner. But the difference is, whereas a lot of the other guys are like trying to break into, ooh, maybe if they did really well, they could get like top 10 at their position in the world, or they could compete with the guy who's the 6th best. Difference is, Froggen legitimately can be considered up there, where if you're being realistic, there might only be like 2 or 3 Koreans who are mid laners who are better than him. So he might be like the 3rd or 4th best mid in the whole world. That's not even an exaggeration when you look at his impact and how he plays his role within his team and his history of performances, clutch under pressure, having great big game performances on like a wide variety of champions. This isn't a video about Froggen's strengths here, but I'm kind of outlining that he has this pedigree. He's a top level player. In this tournament, I think unfortunately him playing terribly actually cost Alliance that spot at the final, and also crucially it cost them a chance to kind of, I'd say, to show off a little bit exactly what the issues are with the shot calling. Because the problem is, in the past, like I said, they had this hesitance to the shot calling. They had this aspect where they just always looked unsure. It's like that's it. It's not that they were overly passive. They were passive, and that was the end result. But it was the hesitation involved with the passivity that always worried me in the old Alliance. Because I always thought to myself, when they get up against teams that can pressure them in the right way, or that can, like a Cloud9 type team, where if you rotate properly, you can force someone into 2 decisions on the map that aren't even about fighting. It's about, do you have to take the fight here, or do you go and defend this? And usually the teams who force those decisions and have a good sense for how the game's going to go, the flow, can get the teams who aren't good and who hesitate to usually make the wrong decision there. And then the team who made the force them wins a little bit. They get a little bit of value in that trade. In this particular case, Alliance's shot calling might have looked a bit better or a bit more suited to the team, except that Froggen played so terribly as the focal point of the team that it cost him in a lot of key situations. Like, historically, one of the main reasons I pinned that whole preface I gave about Froggen onto him is because he's one of the most clutch Western players of all time. The only players who are really up there with him is some of the Gambit players. This is a guy who, if you go look through his history of his entire career, go back to Season 2 at the beginning, and look at playoff series he plays in, and big games he plays in, where this is a master. I'm not talking about LCS regular season or some match in the round of 16. I'm talking about like semi-finals, quarter-final. He's playing against this key opponent who's a rival of his or something. He almost never is the reason his team loses the game. He almost always, to some degree, carries for his team, or like if they're doing badly, he'll still be like a shining star who does well and is able to give them a chance to win and finds a way to play some aspect of the game where he can carry to this degree, or he got them at least close but then they couldn't get over the finish line. His history is great. I mean, one of the best examples was when Alliance was still getting their shit together in the spring split of this year and they lost to Fnatic in that series, and he was just carrying. He wasn't anything to do with why they lost that series. He was the reason why they still had a chance to win that series when other people were having all these different problems. Almost every other member of that team had key problems and flaws and letdowns in that series. But Froggen was playing really high-level League of Legends. Now, when I look at this tournament here, and I've rewatched that series against Cloud9, this is one of the worst series I've ever seen from Froggen. In his entire career, this would be bottom 3 for sure. It might actually be the worst when I think about the context, the team he has, who he's playing against. I think it's probably the worst. He was terrible on Xerath. That just didn't work at all. He kept going within melee range all the time and just getting brutalized and completely caught out, and he was just ineffective on this champion. I understand it's a good farm champion. It's the kind that he would always get drawn to. Usually he's masterful with those. That's the key thing about Froggen as well. Usually it's his control of a champion, like knowing his limits and his comfort level and knowing how to be effective in terms of range and then where to be in the team fight. He had a lot of problems here, and crucially the incredible play of Meteos, being able to lock him down with that flash EQR combo, like that just made Froggen ineffective, unfortunately. Now, normally Froggen isn't one of the problems with Alliance. That's the key point to make here. So that added in with their other problems is kind of what made them look a bit shaky and look a bit bad at times actually in this tournament. So we've gone past the Froggen one there. Let's talk now about Reckless, the new man in the team. Now, here the thing with Reckless is, I actually noticed in this tournament, I hope this will actually be the most interesting part of the video, because this is the main thing that spurred me to do this video, is that I noticed when they were having these team fights in the new alliance, a degree to which Reckless being in the team will make them better, will make them win certain team fights they wouldn't have, but also a degree where it'll make him worse and they'll lose team fights they wouldn't have lost. And here's why. So the upside, let's go with the upside of it. So this is about the dynamic between Reckless and Froggen, because they're the two carries. They're the two guys who have to output the most damage. They're the two guys, just like Froggen and Tabs were before. They're the guys who you expect the enemy to have to kill at some point to win the team fight and for it to definitely be over. And you saw every time Froggen did get deleted in one of those team fights, it was over. That was it. You had to disperse. It was over. You weren't going to win at that point. He was all the burst damage and he farmed up and he got all the items. It was over at that point. The upside is that because everyone is so trained when they play Alliance to knowing you have to get to Froggen and kill him, especially in later game, mid to late game team fights, that everyone was focused like that. You saw every team fight that started, a mixture of bad positioning on Froggen's part and getting caught and then being ineffective on champions. Yeah, that made it easier. But everyone did just, the whole other team, it felt like, the jungler, everyone, it felt like just high, because obviously he's sort of an all-in mid laner. They all just dived right onto Froggen and everything onto him. CC, attack, try and kill. And while they were able to do that, here's the upside. It actually put Reckless in his comfort zone of what he loves to do in teamfights. Reckless's style in the teamfight is not the double lift Uzi style, where you're in the teamfight, you're the main focal point, you're going to be trying to kill everyone else in the job's team is peel for you, and your whole job is output damage, but then the back of my mind you're thinking, right, you've got to dodge as well, got to get out of the way of this, they might attack me here, and it's the dance between those two that makes those guys, I mean admittedly double lift isn't as good as that anymore, and it's not as effective anymore, but when they're at their peak, when you think of the Uzi and double lift of season 2 and Uzi of season 3 or 4, this is what you think of them as. It's the dance between those two that makes them incredible. They not only can kill all the people, but stay alive to do it longer. Like, it's amazing. Reckless has never been like that. Reckless is more like the Genja style, where he's not getting any peel, because the whole point is the team's all about this mid laner. The mid lane is going in, doing all the shit. He's getting attacked, and here's the key thing. Because Reckless is very mechanically skilled, and he's good at this Genja style positioning, just like Genja, he can pick up a lot of kills this way and do a lot of damage. So while everyone was jumping on Froggen and distracted by Froggen, essentially, Reckless had free reign to just do his thing where he just stands around the outside and he picks his moments to come within into auto-attack range and just do damage, while initially people are distracted by trying to attack this guy. It's going to let him get him a lot of kills. He's going to have good stats in Alliance. Crucially, they're going to win some teamfights they wouldn't have otherwise, because in this one area, I think actually a lot of times he's going to be a little bit more effective than Tabs was, because Tabs' kind of style was more like figuring out if the rest of the team had committed, then he would just go all in. He would die as well at some points, or he'd just bully it initially. I think it's going to be more like Reckless is going to be safer in that regard, so he's going to get a lot more damage in the team fights, he's going to get a lot more kills in the team fights, so they're going to win more in that sense. Here's the downside. Because Reckless has that tendency to well, he knows he doesn't have any appeal because that's his style, but to also sit outside, just like everyone used to criticize Genja for sometimes. There's going to be times where he's the last alive, or he's the one who runs away when everyone else is dying and it goes off. Here's the downside of that. I saw team fights where Froggen and Reckless, I remember vividly one. There was one where they were having a fight at the Dragon with Cloud9, and Wicked or Shook, one of them, engaged like at the bottom part of the Dragon pit, and they were both down there, Wicked and Shook, and they were fighting. Cloud9 was fighting them, and it was pretty much almost every Cloud9 member just focused on those two players, and then maybe Nif was off the side or something, and they were just getting destroyed because it was like 2v5 or 2v4. Meanwhile, up here at the top part, almost towards that middle brush in the river going down to the Dragon, was where Froggen and Reckless was. And they were, here's the thing, in the past, because Froggen did have to sometimes 1v9, and he sometimes did know, like, okay, we're losing this game, but I'm still fed, I've still got items, I just have to not die, and we're going to lose this fight, so I'm going to have to get out now. He would almost have to have that solo queue mentality of knowing when to leave people behind. He's still trained to have that mentality, to know, like, this fight's not going to work, I've got to get out, so at least I don't die. Unfortunately, I saw both him and Reckless both stood at that one spot, both doing the same sort of thing, like stepping forwards a bit, but then looking at the fight and seeing someone getting destroyed, and then start moving away a little bit. And that's going to be where they're going to lose some team fights they wouldn't have. Because again, Tab's style was more like, so are like 2 or 3 of us really going in? Okay, I'm committed, let's do this. The problem here is that Froggen and Reckless are your main damage dealers, your main focal points, your main carries, your main guys we're trying to get to the point that could win us the game. And in this particular situation, both of them were not only waiting to get out, but they did get out. And they just left those other guys to just get destroyed and ripped apart and just killed, and then they just got out. So there's also going to be times when Alliance is going to give up team fights they would have won, should have won, could have won, because they've got 2 players who are going to play this more hesitant style and look out for themselves in that particular case. To a degree, logically, but in a way that's not really committing to the entire overall team picture, I feel. So there's the Reckless issue. And I feel like if we talk about some of the other players, that's where you'll really get to the old problems. Because all three of the other players had their own problems. Nif, I'm not particularly down on Nif. I've told you in the tabs one, I actually think he's a good player. I think he's pretty underrated in terms of his style. But I actually felt like in this tournament, what's funny is, Nif in this tournament, his biggest problem was actually that, to tie this into Reckless actually, another aspect with Reckless was, I almost wonder if Reckless had actually, some of the criticism got to him from being in Fnatic, or some of the, maybe in Fnatic, I'm not sure how to describe it. It's basically what happened is, we always used to criticize Reckless in Fnatic for being overly passive laning phase, like not going for the trade that he could get, not getting a time when he's a better player than his opponent, and bullying him and getting kills and snowballing it. It felt like in this series, actually Reckless tried to change his game in that respect, coming into Alliance. I don't know if that's going to be the new Reckless. And he was way overextended on attacks. He was going all in on attacks that just weren't necessary when they weren't. It's not even like you had to win that lane. You didn't have to necessarily always bash it straight immediately. I mean, think about, here's what's funny. You know the game, I think it was game 2, where Sneaky got up like 5 kills because Alliance kept almost all-inning him all the time in the bot lane, then sending other people down and going all in. And the idea was they wanted to get that bot lane down really early and just bash it in completely. And then Sneaky got up to 5 kills. And then what happened at the end of the game? I think Sneaky had like 6 kills and then a bunch of deaths and a couple of assists, and wasn't really any impact beyond the laning phase. So in that particular scenario, yeah, there was some logic to trying to get their combo down. But if you're at their bot lane combo, but if you'd actually thought about it, he never had any impact anyway. You actually didn't need to be as aggressive there for your Reckless, especially because a lot of those all-ins were a bit uncomfortable actually. He just tried to mechanically outplay all the time. It was never really that well thought out in terms of the positioning or where are they relative to their tower and could the jungler be there, and there wasn't a lot of thought to it, so it seemed actually a bit uncharacteristic. I think that could be a problem with Reckless here. Maybe if he really does think that he didn't have the role he should have had in Fnatic, that we're not even going to get all the positives of the old Reckless. Maybe there'll be some issues where he's trying new things, he's trying a new style, which, listen, if you can make it work, great, but right now there was some clear problems there, and so that kind of draws into some of the problems Nif had, which was Nif didn't look at all comfortable when they were going for those 2v2 all-ins and those trades, and sometimes he thought, maybe they can get the best of this. No, it didn't work out. Part of it was, that's not Nif's style. He's not that sort of aggressive style. He's not that sort. He has the skills, but he's not that sort of mentality, and so you could tell sometimes it looked as though maybe he was like lagging behind in terms of the call of when to do it, or he just wasn't comfortable in terms of feeling like, I know exactly what I'm meant to be doing in this sort of position, and how to shield here, and how to zone off, and where to put this spell to preempt the other guy, so he has to come in and then Reckless kills him. There was a lot of stuff off in that synergy there. Whereas, yeah, the Nif and clearly this is the old flaw. The Nif and Tab synergy never was that great. It just was, they got it to work by just finding like a compromise, like a place where we both meet and going, okay, we'll just have to stay there. And so in Tab's case, I mean, he had to be a bit more positive because he was like, well, that's just Nif's world. I've got to connect to him in that respect. Whereas actually, I feel like that's going to be part of the problem here with Reckless, especially if he wants to be more aggressive like this. Then we talk about Wicked. Wicked's been an age-old problem in this team. There's 2 things you always say about Wicked. One, these are the 2 historical problems. 1, builds that don't make sense, except to Wicked. 2, overly aggressive in situations where perhaps you didn't need to be. Always thinking that you're getting the better end of a fight and you're going to bully this lane and this opponent and you're going to make more impact than you actually do. And actually both of them tie in together because they're both to do with sort of the, almost like the hubris or the arrogance or the pride that Wicked has in his style of play and in his strengths and in his builds, is that he always thinks this build makes sense and is going to work out. And that if it didn't work out the last time, well, it doesn't matter. I know it's better, so I'm going to make it work this time and it will work out. And you even saw this in this series. So in the first game, I mean, I could go into a whole fucking video about this itself, but in the first game, you saw a great example of how weird commentary is in the West now. Some of the analysis isn't even analysis. It's just like looking at the result, saying, was it positive or negative, and then just breaking the commentary into positive or negative based on the result. So Wicked in game 1 did this build where he's just going all armor, all health, but just in a weird order. And because they lost game 1, the analysis was like, oh, that build didn't make any sense. Haha, Wicked up to his old tricks again. What was he doing? What was he thinking? Second game does pretty much exactly the same thing. This time it works. He gets it all to work exactly with how he's playing. He has a really great effect. He can't be killed. And everyone's like, that Wicked is a genius. He carried the game. He did a great job. And it's like, so if he'd lost that game, would you have said he was an idiot still? He didn't. That's not even analysis at that point. Like, proper analysis, if it had been the right build and the right approach for the thing, would have been in game one. Like, oh, I saw what he was doing there. It made sense. He didn't get it to work for reasons X, Y, and Z. Likewise, if it was the wrong approach and it really was bad in game one, in game two, you'd say, well, that's actually surprising that he was able to have such a game impact, because actually, you know what? His build was bad. It was the same problems in game one. And actually, I'm not sure about why he did this one first here when this would have been a better option and more viable for what he was trying to do at this point. You're actually supposed to analyse what happened in the game, not just look at the result like anyone can, any random casual fan, and go, oh, did Alexic lose to Power of Evil? Alexic was pretty bad then, and I guess Power of Evil's the best. Like, that's not analysis. But anyway, I actually have gotten digressed there. But my point here I'm trying to make is that even when they won, Wicked was up to his old tricks. It was the same stuff again. I'll tell you from personal experience, and maybe you've seen if he's appeared on shows and in interviews, you'll never get through to Wicked. Like, he's a guy where, if you talk to him, he does have a rationale for his builds and his reasons for playing a certain way. And some of it will click. Like, some of it actually you won't have entirely thought of, and you will give him some credit. The big problem, though, is that there's certain logics where he makes a leap from here to here, where the reason he's able to make that leap is, like, he secretly thinks, like, they just don't understand. Like, if you I know they think that item's not that good there, but if you play it out the way I'm going to do it, then it is. His problem is the leap exists in his mind. He can make the leap sometimes, and someone else wouldn't have thought to, and that's great, and he will find creative things as a result. His problem, as with all people who try to force innovation, is that a lot of the time it doesn't work enough. That's why it's not viable. That's why you can't really do it every 3 games in a row, 2 games in a row. It won't work enough times. And so he isn't able to make it work enough. If you think about this, if he was making it work enough and he had the win rate and he was doing this awesome, even if they were wacky builds, we wouldn't be criticising. We'd be saying, what an innovator. It'd be more like a SOAS thing, like, that shouldn't even work. How is he making it work? Wow, brilliant stuff. We've got to give you a round of applause, mate. Your cavalier approach, but it's incredible. I love it. It's great. It never quite does work that way. And the thing is, same with his impact on the fights. I'm never shocked when Wicked has, like, a good game and is will have the big impact. This guy's a strong top laner. His strength has always been that brute force, physical style of, like, I'm not just going to play this out safe and even and all the rest of it. And so as a result, he's always in there with a chance to dominate the opponent when things go his way and he does get those breaks and he gets things in the right order and the opponent doesn't exploit certain weaknesses. Then he can dominate. That's the key thing. His problem is, again, he can't dominate enough. He can't do that style every single time. That's not going to work historically. So Wicked still has all the same problems. Nothing, as far as I can tell, has been fixed there. I don't know what has been changed, and yet that's always been what we've been promised every phase of Alliance. So coming into the super team, everyone's like, why do you pick him over Kevin? I still think, like, why do you pick him over Kevin? Because I think Kevin's a wonderful player. He would have fit better, but the logic was, he's agreed to play different champions now. He's going to do different stuff. And then you get all the way to Worlds. You'd had some good moments during the splits, but you get all the way to Worlds, it was the same old shit. It's like Aurelia or nothing. So I'm great on Aurelia, but the rest, it's nothing. It's like, wasn't this the same problem a year and a half ago? So the same problems are Wicked, same flaws exist as far as I can tell. Now we come to the last guy, and this is the most obvious one. It's Shook. Part of the reason why I never give him credit as he is the best Western jungler, because you look at the other elite junglers. So we're talking about Meteos, we're talking about Shook, we're talking about we're talking about Jankos, we're talking about Svenskeren. They're all much more polished, much more complete players, more than just one aspect of game impact in terms of what they can do for their opponent and how they can play against certain other types of opponents and the variety of people they can play against and the number of champions. Shook doesn't have any of those qualities. He has incredible mechanics in certain champions and the certain types of situation in the game at certain moments. He has very, very high level, but that's almost one-dimensional at that point. And crucially, he seems to have some sort of nerve issues still. And so as a result, in this series, I mean, when he was playing Warwick, okay, if he has these godlike mechanics and that really is his main strength, what's the point in playing Warwick then? How are you gonna showcase those amazing mechanics if everything goes right and make it work? Because we saw in this series, first of all, he looked bad because Meteos was the MVP of the tournament for me. He outclassed Shook constantly. His impact on the game was incredible. Shook had actually quite a mediocre to bad game impact. He would get caught a lot. He would get killed super early on in fights. He would like, it's funny it was talking about mechanics because there's not really much mechanics to Warwick, but he would still like, he would not chase at the right time. He would chase at the wrong time. He would go in and actually not really be that effective in getting off like the suppression, etc. He had some big issues in these fights. And so you kind of thought to yourself, like, what is the upside here? What was he actually thinking was the best case scenario? What was going to happen there? It's hard to figure it out. And so he's always been one of the biggest problems in Alliance. Getting caught, having no game impact on certain champions, getting killed way too early in team fights, sometimes just not working that well with his lanes. Like, certain champions will get him rolling or get going. Other ones, he's just not doing that much. And unfortunately, when he then goes up against a really good jungler, that's when you really see like, oh, this guy's getting a lot done. I feel like as we go forwards in Alliance, I would say the best way to describe it would be if they think they're adding Reckless, and that Reckless is the X factor. So if he improves his thing, if he integrates with us more, if they think that's the main issue, then they're in for a world of hurt, because they're not going to be bad. They're still one of the favourites to win LCS. They'll still go to Worlds. They'll still be one of the best Western teams. Like I said at the beginning in the context, they could have won this tournament. They'll have all these things going for them still. And the problem is they'll still have all the same flaws. So they'll still be the team that could win a game off anyone, win a series against a lot of good teams. They can also lose to those exact same teams, and for the exact same reasons. They can lose 2-1, the same way they could have won 2-1. That's going to happen again. They can beat Naj and White Shield almost twice in perfect fashion, but they can lose to fucking Kaboom. Now, Kaboom's an extreme example. That really shouldn't have happened. But that's an example of how they have these huge flaws within their game. And so I don't think a lot of that's fixed. And I think Reckless brings a new dynamic, but as I described with the Frog and Reckless synergy, that has its own flaws, its own weaknesses right now at least. And so I'm concerned for Alliance actually. I don't think that this was like the super upgrade and it fixed the problems. It was the panacea to all that ails them. It wasn't really. And so, I mean, I'd be interested to hear what other people think in terms of what Alliance could even change in terms of the style. Can you even fix any of these problems with Wicked, with Shook, with Nif synergizing with the guy in his bot lane? It doesn't really seem like it right now. It seems like they're stuck in these patterns, and it's just when the pattern plays out, did it play out favorably this time? Did the circuit break a little bit like it sometimes does? That's Alliance.